late October 1944. A cold rain had just stopped over a U.S. Ordnance park outside Toul, France, leaving the yard slick with mud and gasoline sheen. 200 black infantry replacements stood in formation beside a line of wooden crates, watching the nails come loose one by one. They had trained on M1 Garands. They had been told they were going forward as riflemen. And then the first crate opened. Not Garands. Old bolt-action Springfields lay inside, stacked muzzle to butt, their walnut stocks scarred from another war. One private reached for a rifle and saw the date stamped into the metal. 1917. The men went quiet. Across the yard, under a canvas cover, sat 6 unopened crates with bright stencil marks on the side. M1 Garand. Combat priority, immediately. Major Isaac Bell saw the crates. Then he saw the ledger. Not the official manifest laid open for inspection, the smaller one. The one the supply clerks kept half hidden under a blotter, where whole units were reduced to 2 penciled letters. BC Black Combat. And in that office, those 2 letters meant second-rate rifles for first-rate danger. Bell did not shout in the yard. He did not let his men see his hands shake. He walked into the depot office, shut the door behind him, and asked the ordnance captain a question that would travel farther than either man expected. "Captain, why are my riflemen being issued weapons your own infantry would refuse?" Captain Leonard Pike did not look embarrassed. He looked annoyed. He was 36 years old, pale, neat, and polished in the way rear area officers could afford to be. His desk was clean. His boots were clean. Even his war looked clean. He tapped the paper with his fountain pen. "Your battalion has been filled according to theater availability." Bell stepped closer. "Availability is not the issue. I just passed 6 crates of Garands marked for immediate combat issue." Pike looked up. "Those crates are reserved. For who?" "For units listed under primary infantry priority. My men are infantry." Pike let the silence hang just long enough to make the insult official. Then he said, "Not in the way that list defines it. Outside, the rainwater dripped off canvas roofs and truck tailgates. Somewhere near the motor pool, a mechanic hit a stuck bolt with a wrench." Inside the office, Bell stared at the man behind the desk and understood the trap with perfect clarity. The Army had trained his men to fight a modern war. This depot was sending them to fight it with yesterday's leftovers. To understand what that meant, you have to understand what France had become by the autumn of 1944. After the breakout from Normandy, Allied armies had moved so fast that the map outran the supply system. Gasoline had to be hauled over wrecked roads. Ammunition was counted by the truckload. Replacement troops arrived in waves, tired before they had even seen the line. Everything was short. But shortage was only part of the truth. Shortage explained why depots were strained. It did not explain why the newest rifles were sitting within arm's reach, while black combat replacements were handed bolt-em actions older than some of their fathers. The M1 Garand could fire 8 rounds as fast as a trained man could aim and squeeze. It gave an infantryman a fighting rhythm. It let a squad keep pressure on the enemy while moving. The Springfield was accurate. It was respected, but in a close fight against German automatic weapons, accuracy alone was not mercy. A man had to work the bolt after every shot. 5 rounds, then reload. 5 more. Against an MG-42, that pause could be the rest of his life. Major Bell knew that. Every man who had crawled through live-fire training knew it. Every officer who had ever read a casualty report knew it. Captain Pike knew it too. He simply believed some lives could be filed under a lower category. Bell pulled the requisition sheet from the desk and laid it flat. This says standard combat equipment. Pike leaned back. It says equipment appropriate to assigned classification. You created the classification. I maintain the classification. You are separating combat troops by race. Pike's jaw tightened. I am maintaining order in a congested depot. Bell pointed toward the yard. Order does not require you to send men into a rifle fight without rifle parity. Pike's voice cooled. Major, you are getting what your battalion is authorized to receive. Authorized by whom? By depot procedure. Show me the theater order. Pike did not move. Bell had been in the army long enough to recognize the exact shape of a lie when it wore paperwork as a uniform. He looked at the locked cabinet behind Pike's chair, then at the second ledger, disappearing beneath the blotter. Then back at the captain. There is no order, is there? Pike stood. You are out of line. No, my men are out of rifles. The words hit harder than Bell intended. For the first time, one of Pike's clerks looked up from his typewriter. Pike lowered his voice. Take the Springfields, Major. March your men to their assembly area. Make no noise. This war has enough problems without you inventing another one. Bell held his stare. The problem was invented before I walked in. Then he turned, opened the door, and stepped back into the yard. The men were still standing in formation. They had not broken ranks, but the news had already passed down the line without a word. A rifle can tell a soldier how much his country thinks his life is worth. One look at those crates had told them enough. Bell crossed the mud to the signal tent. The corporal at the field phone hesitated when Bell asked for Army headquarters. Sir, Depot Command said all complaints go through Regional Ordnance. Bell took the receiver. This is not a complaint. It took 3 transfers, 1 angry colonel, and 11 minutes of dead air before Bell reached the aid he needed. He gave no speech. He read the manifest number. He read the crate markings. He read the hidden classification copied from Pike's second ledger. Then he said one sentence. Somebody at this depot is using race as a weapon against American riflemen. 40 minutes later, a jeep came through the south gate so fast the guards stepped backward into the mud. It did not stop at the checkpoint. It did not stop at depot headquarters. It rolled straight into the supply yard and braked beside the opened crates. 3 men climbed out, 2 military policemen, and Lieutenant General Raymond Sloan, commander of the field army, whose infantry was bleeding through the Lorraine mud. He was not famous for speeches. He was famous for asking short questions and expecting answers to survive contact with facts. Sloan looked down into the crate of Springfields. He picked one up, worked the bolt, set it back. Then he walked to the canvas-covered Garand crates and read the stencil. After that, he entered Pike's office without knocking. Captain Pike rose so quickly his chair struck the wall. General, I was not informed. No, Sloan said. That seems to be the theme. He placed one muddy glove on the desk. How many rifles are in those Garand crates? Pike swallowed. Approximately 480, sir. How many black riflemen in Major Bell's battalion? 212. How many are going forward? All of them, sir. Against what enemy? Pike blinked. German forces, sir. With what weapons? Pike's mouth opened, but no answer came out clean. Sloan nodded toward the yard. Do not say availability. I have already seen availability sitting under a tarp. The office went still. Sloan picked up the official manifest, then lifted the blotter beneath it. The smaller ledger was there, not misplaced, not accidental. There in careful handwriting with unit names, racial designations, equipment classes, and issue restrictions. The general read 2 lines. That was all he needed. His face did not redden. His voice did not rise. That made it worse. "Captain Pike, explain why the Army's rifles are being divided by a code that does not appear in my combat order." Pike reached for the only shield he had. "Sir, segregated units have historically been issued secondary material when primary stocks were constrained. I was following established depot practice." Sloan looked at him for a long moment. "Established by whom?" Pike's eyes dropped to the ledger. Sloan leaned in. "That is not an answer." Pike tried again. "Sir, I believed the Garands should be conserved for assault formations with the highest expected contact. Are Major Bell's men not expected to contact the enemy? They are replacement personnel." "Replacement for what?" "Infantry losses, sir." "Then they are going where infantry has been dying." Pike had no reply. Sloan turned the ledger around and pushed it across the desk. "You made a private army inside a public war." The line seemed to stun the room more than any shout could have. "You used a supply book to decide which American soldiers deserved a modern chance to survive. You disguised prejudice as procedure, and you expected the front to absorb the cost." He tapped the ledger once. "That cost is measured in bodies, Captain, not paperwork." Outside, men had begun to gather near the office windows. Drivers, clerks, armorers, black replacements standing beside old rifles they had not yet accepted as their fate. Sloan could feel them there. He did not perform for them. He spoke to Pike as if the entire war had narrowed to one desk, one book, and one decision. A supply officer does not get to downgrade a man's life because he dislikes the color of the hand reaching for the weapon. You do not own these rifles. You do not own these men, and you do not own the right to decide which of them is expendable. Pike's lips moved. "Sir, with respect, disrupting the depot system." Sloan cut him off. "The system is already disrupted. You did it." Then he looked to the MPs. "Seal the office. Take every ledger, manifest, card file, and issue sheet. No document leaves this room except under guard." The MPs moved at once. Pike reached for a folder. One MP caught his wrist before his fingers touched it. That was the moment the Yard understood. Not from a speech. From the small, humiliating fact that the man who had handed out rifles like verdicts was no longer allowed to touch his own paperwork. Sloan stepped back outside. The rain had started again, light and cold. Major Bell stood by his formation, his face unreadable. The general pointed to the old rifles. "Stack them." For a second, no one moved. Then the first black private set his Springfield down in the mud. Another followed. Then another. Wood and steel struck wet ground in a slow, uneven rhythm. A pile formed beside the loading dock. Not a bonfire, not a spectacle, just evidence. Then Sloan pointed to the Garand crates. "Open those." The armorers hesitated only long enough to look at Pike. Pike said nothing. The crowbars went in. The lids came up. Inside, packed in grease paper and oiled wood, were the rifles Bell's men had been trained to carry. Sloan gave the order himself. "Issue them to Major Bell's battalion. Rifle, sling, clips, cleaning kit. Full combat load. No substitutions." The first Garand went to Private Samuel Griggs, a 19-year-old from Birmingham who had not spoken all morning. He took it with both hands, not like a gift, like something that had always belonged on the other side of his training. Soon the yard filled with the metallic language of an army correcting itself. Bolts checked, clips counted, serial numbers logged by new clerks under MP watch. The old ledger lay open on a crate where everyone could see it, its neat columns suddenly stripped of authority. Captain Pike stood beside the office door, rain dripping from the brim of his cap. He looked smaller without the desk in front of him. Bell approached Sloan only after the last man in the first platoon had received his rifle. "General," he said quietly, "my men will be ready to move." Sloan watched the replacements adjusting slings, checking sights, learning the weight of survival in their hands. "They were ready before I arrived," he said. Then his eyes shifted toward the office. The depot wasn't. By nightfall, the two-ledger system at Toul was dead. Not across the whole army, not across the whole country, not even across every depot in France. That would be too clean, and war was rarely clean. But in that yard on that day, a rule that had hidden behind ink was dragged into the open and made to answer for itself. Pike was relieved before sunset. His issue authority was suspended. His files were seized. Every shipment he had classified under race-coded priority was pulled for review. The investigation later found what Bell had already seen in the space of 1 minute. Modern rifles had not been unavailable. They had been withheld. A clerk admitted that Pike had ordered him to maintain the second ledger because certain units were not to draw from first-quality combat stock. Another clerk produced 3 torn requisition slips from the wastebasket, each one rejected despite matching the same combat requirement approved for white replacement companies that same week. Paper had told the truth because the men using it had become too comfortable to fear it. Major Bell's battalion moved east before dawn. They entered the line with M1s in their hands, not museum rifles on their shoulders. No rifle made a soldier immortal. No order erased the insult of what had happened. And no general's anger could undo every unequal mile those men had marched before reaching that depot. But parity mattered. In the hedgerows, in the forests, in the broken villages where sound bounced off stone walls and seconds came faster than prayers, parity could be the thin border between a fighting chance and a prepared grave. 3 weeks later, a casualty summary from Bell's sector crossed Sloan's desk. The battalion had taken losses, all infantry did. But after an enemy counterattack near a frozen road junction, Bell's men held their line for 6 hours until relief arrived. The after-action notes mentioned steady rifle fire, controlled clips, and a platoon that kept moving under pressure instead of being pinned in place during reloads. Sloan read the report twice. Then he wrote 1 sentence in the margin and sent a copy to Theater Ordnance. Do not confuse a man's assigned category with his value under fire. There was no parade for what happened at Toul. No headline. No clean victory speech. Most wars contain thousands of little offices where life and death are decided before the shooting starts. A crate goes left instead of right. A name is marked priority or secondary. A man behind a desk convinces himself that a bad rule is not his fault because it has a form number attached to it. That is how prejudice survives in uniform. Not only through shouting, not only through hatred loud enough to echo. Sometimes it survives through a neat signature, a locked cabinet, and a clerk trained not to ask why one group of soldiers gets yesterday's war for tomorrow's fight. But the battlefield has a way of exposing lies that offices can hide. A bolt-action rifle does not become equal because a ledger says it is adequate. A black infantryman does not become less exposed because a captain writes him into a lower column. And a modern army cannot call itself efficient while wasting courage through discrimination. The men in that yard had already volunteered for the same bullets. All they asked for was the same chance to answer them. By the time the last Garand left its crate, the old rifles lay in the mud, dark with rain, their steel still serviceable, but their meaning changed forever. They were no longer just obsolete weapons. They were proof of what happens when a nation asks men to fight for freedom while making them beg for the tools to survive. And that day, at least in one French supply yard, the ledger lost. The soldiers did not.